Hey, welcome back to another Pragmatic Works YouTube video. In my last video, we discussed how to create many-to-many relationships between tables in Dataverse and how to use those many-to-many relationships inside of Canvas apps. Today, however, we're going to be looking at an alternative method for many-to-many relationships, and that's what we like to call a junction table, or you'll sometimes hear it referred to as a joiner table. So let's dive right in. Let's figure out what those tables look like and how to use them in our Canvas app to store our many-to-many relationships. All right, so diving right into our solution, let's just take a quick recap of the data structure we're working with here. In the last video, we have a classic many-to-many relationship. This is one that's easy for everyone to wrap their heads around because everyone has been a student at some point in their life. So we've got a table for all of our classes, and we've got a table for all of our students. Every student could have multiple classes, and every class could have multiple students. So therefore, we have a nice classic many-to-many relationship. And last week with our Canvas app, we looked at how to work with this many-to-many relationship with what's called the relate and unrelate function. So for Dave Davidson, we deselect math, deselect English, and it's unrelating English from Dave Davidson in that many-to-many relationship. So when I click through different students, I go back to Dave Davidson. He only has art and technology left. If I click science and go through to some other students, and I go back to Dave Davidson, it's got science, art, and technology. So that many-to-many relationship is really quick. It's really easy to work with. It's very performant in Canvas apps. However, the one drawback is that we can't store any additional metadata with this relationship. Like, for example, what is Dave Davidson's grade in science? What's his grade in art and technology? So that's where we like to use the joiner table because it allows us that flexibility to add different metadata about the relationship between the class and the student. So let's pop back over to our solution and let's recreate that table. I did create this table in the video last time, but we're just going to do it really quickly again as a nice recap. So we've got a class table and a student table, and now we want to create a third table to kind of bridge the gap between these two tables. That's why we call it a junction table, because it joins these two tables into one separate table. So we'll go to New, we'll go to Table, and just like we are using this table to join the classes with the students, I'm just going to join their names. So we'll just call this Student Class. The plural name will be Student Classes. For the primary name column, we'll just do a class ID. And save. So now how this is going to work is rather than just a virtual table kind of in the background that, stores this relationship between the class and the students, if Nate Hallowell has 3 different classes, so let's say I have math, science, and technology, then I will have 3 distinct records in this table. It will say Nate Hallowell, math, Nate Hallowell, science, Nate Hallowell, technology. That way I can add a third column to store the grade. So first, let's go into our columns. And because I made this class ID column, this is the primary name column. Because I've called it class ID, I just want to make sure I change this to an auto number. For the prefix, we'll just say class. Perfect. And just to make this a little bit easier to see, let's also filter down this name column by just using my prefix for my publisher, M2M, many-to-many. And now we've got the GUID column and the primary name column. So now we need a one-to-many lookup relationship between the classes and one for the students as well. So for each of those separate tables, they're going to have their own lookup column right here. So this first one, we'll call this class, and this will look up to none other than my class table. Let's add another lookup column, and this one will be for the student. And lastly, let's add one metadata column just to solidify this concept. And this will be the grade. So the student's grade in each class. For the data type, we'll just do a whole number. And perfect. Just like that, we have a junction table. Sounds super technical, but it's actually very simple, as you can see. So now let's go over to our Canvas app and look at how we're going to insert this joiner table to kind of act as our many-to-many. So I'm going to switch back to my Canvas app here, and I've already got a screen kind of stubbed out for this. Here we have a gallery of all of our students, and over on the right, we've got a gallery of all of our classes. As you can see, these are just unfiltered versions of those tables. So we've got all the students, all of the classes. And now down in this area right here, this is where we want to put in our new joiner table for each selected student. So when we click on Dave Davidson, we want to show all of Dave Davidson classes right here in a gallery, and maybe we'll even do an editable gallery so that we can enter in Dave's grade in each of those classes as well. But before we do that, we need a way to easily add Dave Davidson to any of these classes, and also a way to remove him from any of these classes. So the way we did that in our many-to-many relationship was with a simple checkbox. I kind of like that method. You could use a form, you can use a button, really whatever you wanted to do to create that record or create that relationship, you could use. I personally just like the checkboxes. So I'm going to go back to this screen right here, and in this gallery, I'm going to put in a checkbox. And basically I wanted to say, when I select that checkbox, when I click it, when I check it, I want it to create a record in the student class table for Dave Davidson for the class that I selected. So let's look at how to do that. I'm going to go to Insert, and in the last video we used the classic checkbox, but I kind of like the modern ones. I kind of like the way that Microsoft is going here with the kind of veer away from UI and more focused on the UX. So I'm going to go with the new modern checkbox here. And as you can see, it did not add it to my gallery. So I need to make sure I'm in the template cell. I'll go back, insert a checkbox, move it over here to the left, make sure the label is gone. And go into play mode, and that looks pretty good. The label's a little bit offset. I'll just move that down a little bit. Close enough. So now let's think about what we need to happen when we select this checkbox. When I click this checkbox for science, I want it to create a record to say, Dave Davidson is currently taking science. So let's do that one first. So let's go to the onCheck property of this checkbox. And what I want to do is I want to just patch a record. So I want to insert a record into that table. So we'll do patch parentheses. And now you see that I only have 2 tables in my app. So the very first thing that we need to do is make sure that that table is a part of the Canvas app. So I'm going to go over here to data. I'm going to click add data, and I'm going to search for my student classes. Now I've got the one main student table, the one main class table, and then the table that joins them together. So we've got in the onCheck property of our checkbox, let's patch to student classes. And the way that we insert a record with a patch statement is by using the defaults function. So defaults for student classes. And then we're going to specify our 2 lookup columns. So the student is going to be equal to whatever this gallery is called. Let's go back to our tree view. And this gallery here with the students is called gallery 1. So I want the student in student classes to match gallery 1.selected. And I want that student to be marked as being in the class that we are currently on in this gallery. So the checkbox that I just selected. So the way we reference a record in a gallery is just by saying this item. So I'll close my curly brackets and I'll close my parentheses. So that will write a record to the student class table for Dave Davidson in science. Now we need to figure out what happens when I uncheck this, when I maybe want to remove Dave Davidson from that class. So let's go to the onUncheck property. And here, what we want to do is we want to remove that record from that joiner table. So we're going to have to use a lookup formula here. So on uncheck of this checkbox, we want to remove. Which table do we want to remove a record from? We want to remove a record from student classes. And which item do we want to remove? Which record do we want to remove from that table? So we're going to do a lookup formula here to find that record where Dave Davidson is the student and science is the class. So we want to look up to student classes where the student, and we want to use the GUID columns here to find these records. So the GUID for the student and the GUID for the class, and whichever record matches both of those, that's the record that we want to remove. So we have to say student, which is the field, and then which field within that lookup field, we want to use the student column from the student table, which is of course the GUID column. So student.student is equal to gallery1.selected.student. And we'll add an additional parameter to this lookup statement. So the way we do that is by doing a double ampersand. That's shorthand for and in PowerFX. So we'll say the student equals the student and the class dot class. So the GUID for our class equals this item dot class. So we'll close our parentheses, and we'll close our parentheses again for the remove statement. And then the third thing, so with a checkbox method, we have to configure three properties. The default property, so should it be checked or not when we load this table up, what happens when we check it, and what happens when we uncheck it. So we've done the last two. We just need to configure that first property of should this checkbox be checked whenever we pick on a new student. So let's go to the checked property, and we'll provide a true or false statement. So the best way to do this, I think there's probably multiple methods, but my favorite is by using the not is empty or the exclamation mark is empty. So what we need to say here to determine if this checkbox should be checked is we need to look at the student classes table and see if there is a record for Dave Davidson in science. If there is a record with both of those being true, then we want this checkbox to be checked because he's in that class. If there is not a record, if it is not able to find a record where Dave Davidson is a student and science is a class, then we want that checkbox to be unchecked by default. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say not is empty. So is empty is going to return a true or false statement. And we want to say is empty student classes, and we're going to filter that to see if there's a record that matches. The exclamation mark is going to do the inverse of that. So it's going to say not is empty, or this filtered table is not empty. So not is empty, and then we want to filter student classes. And the logical test that we want to do here is class.class equals this item.class. And in a filter statement, rather than doing the double ampersand, we can just add a comma to add an additional logical test to this statement. So we'll say class equals class, comma, student dot student equals gallery1 dot selected dot student. So we'll close, and we should see, because this is a new table, all of our checkboxes are unchecked. So let's first run this in play mode and see if we are correctly writing our records and see if it's keeping that information in our app. So we'll say for Dave Davidson, he is in art and he's in technology. So now I've got 2 checkboxes right here for art and technology. If I go to a different student, Pete Peterson, Pete is currently in no classes. Roberta is in no classes, all the way down, no classes, no classes. So we go back to Dave Davidson, and our default property is working. It's remembering that Dave is in art and technology because there's a record there. So let's make sure the remove statement that we wrote works. So let's remove Dave from art. Let's go to a different student, Pete Peterson, go back to Dave, and Dave is only in technology. So now we've got this screen working just like our many-to-many relationship did from the video the last time. So we'll do this with a couple of students here. We'll put Roberta in science and technology. We'll put Nate in English and art. And we'll put Dave in science, math. We'll give one, let's say Pete Peterson, he's an overachiever. We're going to put him in every class. So now we flip through our students. It's remembering who is in what class. Perfect. So now we've essentially just recreated what we did in the last video with the many-to-many relationship. But now, because we're using that junction table, we can start to actually manage these students here. We can have some additional information, like what is the student's grade. So the way we do that, I already have a section here. So let's put in a gallery into this section, and we want to filter our student classes by whatever student we have selected over here on the left. So with my container selected, I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm just going to put in a gallery here. I'll move this down, give some more room. And I'm going to change the default layout here to just a title for right now. Move this up. The text doesn't need to be so large, just some quick formatting things. There we go. That looks pretty good. So now, what are the items that we want to show in this gallery? Well, we want to show student classes, but we don't want to show every student class. We want to only show the student classes for the student we have selected. So let's go back to our items property, kill this, and we want to say, we want to filter student classes. And we want to filter the student classes where the student.student equals gallery1.selected.student. And there we go. So as we flip through, we see we get different records here. And now, rather than displaying the auto number, let's go back to the label for this in this gallery, and rather than being class ID, let's put in the name of the class, right? We already know we're looking at the selected student, so let's put the name of the class. So class, because it's a lookup column that returns a record, and we want to return the name for that class. So we'll do this item .class.name. So what we should expect to see here is that this gallery matches the checkboxes from up above. If I want to add Nate to another class, I can just simply check the box up here, and now there's a record here for English, art, and science. If I want to remove Nate from science, I just deselect that, and now it's gone from our table student classes. Perfect. And as I flip through my other students, we see science technology, Pete Peterson has all of them. Beautiful. And now let's add our final piece here, which is now we can store metadata against this relationship like the student's grade. So for this, I'm going to move this. This doesn't need to be so large. And let's go to Insert. I'm going to try the modern control again. Let's do a text input. So over here, we'll put in a text input for the student's grade. Doesn't need to be so large. And I'm going to zoom in. I'm just going to do some quick formatting here. Let's move this down a little bit. And we can see we can type into here. This is a text input. Perfect. So the next thing we need to do is configure the default value for this text input. So let's go up to the value. And right now it's set to just be blank. So for the value, let's put in this item dot grade. And we can see that if we go to play, none of them have a grade yet. But let's let the user know that, hey, this is a text input they can write into here. So for the value, let's use a coalesce formula. So coalesce will return the first non-blank value. So we'll say coalesce. It's basically like a simpler way of saying if is blank, but it's just a lot easier to write. So we'll do coalesce, and we'll say this item dot grade, and then our second value, so if that is blank, a 0. So if there's no grade, just put 0, otherwise put this grade. So we go up to play, and now we can write in for Nate Hallowell in English. We'll say Nate's got a 85. But now we need a way to remember that value, because now if I go back to Nate, it doesn't remember. We haven't done anything with that text box yet. So the last piece here is, let's go into the onChange property of this text input. So onChange, what do we want to happen? Let's go ahead and patch to student classes. And because this gallery is representing student classes, we can just do this item as the record that we want to update. And then the value that we want to send back is for the grade column. And we want to send back the value that is within this text canvas input. Or it's text input canvas. That's the name of my control. Dot value. So let's test this last piece out. So we go to play, and we'll say Dave. We've got technology, science, and math. Let's say in math, Dave has a 100. If we hit enter, it'll store that. If we click on a different record, we can say in science, he's got a 95. This guy's a really good student. And in technology, we'll say he's got an 80. So now as I go to a different student, we've got science, math, technology, English, art, right? We go back to Dave. It's still storing those grades for Dave. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this helps you understand the concept of joiner tables and maybe why they're beneficial to use versus a many-to-many relationship. So thanks for staying tuned all the way to the end, and we'll see you in the next video.